Hello, everybody. This is Athens for Everyone's event called Candidates Discuss. Today, we're going to be talking about criminal justice reform with our awesome panel. And today, our panel is even awesomer because we are joined by our guest, John Q. Williams, who's running for sheriff. And John, I let everybody introduce themselves also, so you can kind of expand a little on who you are and what you're about in just a second. Before we get started though, I just kind of want to talk about two things real quick. We wanted to talk about criminal justice reform. Oh no, it looks like maybe we lost Zach for a second. He's back. Zach is at a restaurant, so he might come in and out. So we're talking about criminal justice reform, which all of you have a great deal of knowledge, if not expertise, on different aspects of this. And so with 6 people and that much knowledge between all of us, it seems only fair to probably break this up into this being the first part where we discuss criminal justice reform, and then doing our next candidates discuss also on criminal justice reform, if John will be so sweet as to join us again. And then the other thing is that a few of us are going to a rally or a march that starts at 6 p.m. and anybody is welcome to leave as they need to for that. And with that said, John, do you mind being the first one to introduce yourself, and then I'll call on the rest when you're done?
Yeah, I never mind the opportunity to talk, so I'll give it a shot. Anyway, I'm John Q. Williams. I'm the Democratic nominee for sheriff in the county of Clark, Athens, Clark County area. Part of my platform is based on criminal justice reform. Just some of the things that we can do going forward to make criminal justice itself more fair and safe, and keep the city and the county safe for everybody. So my focus is really just making things better for everyone, every aspect from education to community outreach, and just basically things that we can do just to make the relationships and partnerships between the community and law enforcement better throughout the county. And hopefully, maybe it's a bit ambitious, I think that we can build something here in Athens, Clark County that people around the country will look at and say, hey, this is how it should be done.
Nice, thank you. Let's see, Jonathan, you want to go?
Sure, I'm Jonathan Wallace. I'm running for House District 119, which is the southeastern portion of Clark County. Think Cedar Shoals High School, and south of there, it captures a little bit of downtown, a little bit of 5 Points, and then the majority of Oconee County. And I'm running for State House Rep. I served from 2017 to 2019 in this role, and I'm looking to go back and push a strong criminal justice reform there at the State House.
Awesome, thank you. Deborah, you want to go?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. I am Deborah Gonzalez, and I am running for District Attorney in the Western Judicial Circuit. That includes all of Athens, Clark, and Oconee counties. And very similar to John Q., my platform is based on criminal justice reform and making sure that we can have a true criminal justice system and not just a criminal legal system. And so this is a topic that we'll be discussing this time, and part 2 that's very close to my heart and something that I'm working very hard on. So thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Awesome. Richard?
Hi, I'm Richard Dean Winfield. I'm running for the United States Senate in that special election, which has no primary. It's being called the jungle election because there's so many candidates going at it all the way till November, with a really inevitable runoff in January. Nonetheless, it could be the race on which the control of the Senate depends. And I've been teaching at the university, teaching philosophy since 1982. I'm the father of 3 kids who went through the public schools in Athens. My wife, who comes from India, is an attorney who originally was working as a employees lawyer and now is an immigration attorney. I am also a member of the United Campus Workers of Georgia, which is attempting to unionize all of the employees in the state university system. And I ran for the US House of Representatives 2 years ago in the 10th district. And I ran then and I'm running now on what I consider are the radical transformations that we need to undergo in order to really fulfill the project of our nation, to be a beacon of freedom. And that requires recognizing and enforcing the social rights we've ignored. And that involves providing the removal of all of those blockages of opportunity that have led to our situation where we are the world leader in mass incarceration, where we are the most unequal nation in the developed world, where we still have entrenched racial and gender disadvantage, and where our entire legal system, including the criminal legal system, has turned into one big toll road, which not only sucks in predominantly poor people, but makes them poorer as they emerge out of this system, and supports itself by squeezing them to the bone. And I'm putting forward some radical reforms that I wish other people were following, like legal care for all, like abolishing plea bargaining and pleas, like getting rid, of course, of all for-profit prisons and probation systems, getting rid of cash bail, and some measures that I think will radically put to end the school to prison pipeline and recidivism, namely a federal job guarantee to wipe out unemployment and poverty income. So we'll obviously get into all these things as we address these issues.
Mocha, you wanna go?
Hey everybody, my name is Mocha Jasmine Johnson. I'm an educator, activist, entrepreneur, co-founder of the Athens Anti-Discrimination Movement, and I'm also running for Georgia State House District 117. I basically jumped into activism advocating for criminal justice reform, racial justice, and equity. Throughout that journey, we have been able to establish a local cash bail ordinance by collaborating with various community members and other organizations. We have also implemented a local alcohol anti-discrimination ordinance. So if someone has been discriminated or feel like they have been discriminated against when they try to enter a bar based on dress code, not having proper signage, they can go to the county attorney's office and file a claim. We've been a part of several movements. So I would like to discuss the things that are already established here through the activism work by community members on ground level, and to see how this can be improved on a state and federal level, and what we can do to eliminate cash bail, not just on a local ordinance level, but on a state level. Also, I'm currently a co-chair on the Police Advisory Board. Our job is to make recommendations on a civilian oversight board that should be established in Athens, Clarke County. I was also the co-chair on C.R. Chisholm, the solicitor, pre-arrest diversion program. So I would like to share those things with you because those are criminal justice reform efforts. They're micro steps, and there's a lot of work left to be done, but they're there and people can use them, and they have been working in Athens, Clarke County.
Thanks, Mocha. And Zach.
Hey y'all, my name is Zachary Perry. I'm a law student here at UGA, a partner, and I'm a Democratic nominee for State Senate District 46, which encompasses most of Clarke County, all of Oconee County, and most of Walton County. I apologize for the noise. I'm going to the protest later, and I am at Walker's having a safe socially distanced beer while I tune into this. I'm very passionate about criminal justice reform. If you don't know, Georgia has long been one of the leaders nationally in criminal justice reform. But if you look at how far we have to go, you realize how low that bar is. So I'd like to be a part of refocusing the Georgia legislature and executive branch to reforming our criminal justice system, beginning with ending cash bail, abolishing the death penalty, and completely reforming our probation and parole system, which is the largest in the country, both by population, percentage of population, and just sheer numbers, towards a reform-minded model, and housing-first reentry model. And I'm happy to be here.
Yay. I'm so glad all of y'all are here. Let's get into it. I was thinking we'd start with the school to prison pipeline, especially I got to know a lot about that when I was working with MOCA in Athens anti-discrimination movement. So if anyone has something to say right off the bat, just pipe up and we'll go from there.
I guess I can chime in real quickly. You know, with the fact that Georgia recently cut like $950 million in funds for basic classroom education. Also, they have cut funds, reduced funds for career training, grants for special needs students. I am highly concerned what that's going to look like in 2021 for the school to prison pipeline system, because students that struggle with reading, being able to survive in the classroom, it starts at a young age. And when they're cutting budget and early education, it's going to cause a wider gap, I believe, in the long run when it comes to the school to prison pipeline system. And that also has to do with the punitive punishment. We have officers in the schools. Some of these kids are going to misbehave because they're not able to keep up in the classroom. And, you know, that is something that is going to be highly concerning. And I think that as a state representative or on any level, if you're a government official, cutting the budget wasn't the best thing to do if you want us to really have our children thrive and to close the gap when it comes to the school to prison pipeline.
Could I chime in
Mm-hmm.
regarding the problem you're speaking about, MOCA? You know, when Georgia legislators are cutting funding for schools, this is part of the general problem in this country, where we don't have any right to education in our Constitution, where taking care of education is left up to the states, and there are big differences in how much funding each state allocates for education. And as we all know, whereas the federal government currently gives about 10% of the funding to schools, about half of the 90% given by states comes from property taxes. And that means that the wealthier the neighborhood, the more money they have to provide for their kids in schools. And that means there's this built-in penalty, educational gap between rich and poor. And since in a place like Georgia and much of the country, African Americans have a poverty rate 3 times that of the white population, all of this disadvantage has a racial aspect. So I think we really need to think about having national funding of public schools for it to be really equitable, and not allow property taxes to have any role in school funding, not allow even have states deal with it.
Right.
Every child should have at least equal funding, and we need to give more funding to the students who are struggling. And you know, we're right now struggling here in Athens and everywhere else with how to deal with schooling in a pandemic. Mm-hmm. And if we're going to resume in-person schooling, we clearly have to have social distancing, which really means we've got to reduce class size in half, if not more. Now, it turns out, you know, I did a little research when I was trying to look into educational policy. There are only 2 things that have been shown to make a real difference in the learning of students in public schools. One is class size. Mm-hmm. And that is of greatest importance in the lower grades. The other is how much you pay teachers. Mm-hmm. Now we have an opportunity now. I mean, we're forced, as a matter of life and death, to reduce class sizes at least in half, if not more. We should make that permanent. Of course, it requires federal funding. And we need to raise teacher salaries. Bernie Sanders in his presidential campaign suggested a minimum of $60,000 a year. Right. And I think that's a good place to start. Because as we all know, there is a teacher pay gap. Teachers make considerably less than other people with comparable education. That partly reflects the fact that teaching is a field that is dominated by women. Mm-hmm. And all those fields that are dominated by women, we know, have lower wages than those that are not. And I think we've got to raise teacher salaries. Nationally, it requires national resources, reduce class size. And I know from my experience, you know, as a parent of 3 children who went through all levels of the public school in Athens, you can see that kids from poor homes who are struggling with all sorts of obstacles, including worse medical care, worse nutrition, no place to do their studies at home, etc. They're really struggling, and many are failing to come up to reading and writing and arithmetic levels by 3rd grade. And after that, if they don't do that, the rest of schooling is torture and humiliation, because they can't absorb any of the material in the grades to come, because they don't yet have the skills. And as a result, schooling becomes a very demoralizing situation, which I think is obviously a key part of a school to prison pipeline, where people, first of all, drop out. And then the other side, I think, of the school to prison pipeline, which is crucial, is we tolerate poverty and unemployment. That's a political decision. It's not inevitable that there be poor people. It's not inevitable that there be unemployment. It's a political decision that we have made as a nation, and we're tolerating both in the richest nation in human history, with more wealth and opportunity at our disposal if we choose to make it. So I think we need, at a federal level, to abolish unemployment and poverty income with a federal job guarantee that will offer to anyone, any young person coming out of school or of age, a job that would serve the community, providing the goods and services the market's not providing, that we need, and at a fair wage, starting at $20 an hour, which is the minimum you really need. Imagine what would happen if every person coming out of our public schools knew that they had a job awaiting them, doing things like providing broadband to everyone, building a green infrastructure, providing the human services we badly need. And also imagine what that would do to the recidivism rate, which is 70% within 5 years. If everyone coming out of prison knew they had a job awaiting them at $20 and up, serving our community, I think that would have a completely transformative impact of where we are. And it can be done. Unfortunately, it really can only be done at the national level. Certainly the city can't provide the resources to carry this through. The state might be able to if we really had an ambitious governor and the state assembly was filled with Mocha Johnsons, but it's not. But the
You're
federal
right about that.
level, and don't, let me not forget Jonathan Wallace and Zachary Perry.
Right.
If we were multiplied 100 times, then we could do it.
Yeah.
So I'd like to take it in a slightly different way. As you know, I am running for district attorney, and I see the role that the district attorney plays, because juvenile justice in Athens and Oconee does fall under the district attorney. And there's a couple of things that I'd like to bring up. The first thing is, this last legislative session, there was a real push to increase the age from 17 to 18 in terms of minors in the juvenile justice system. So Georgia is one of the very few, maybe 2 or 3 states where minors are considered anybody under the age of 17. Most of the other states, it's anybody under the age of 18, and that makes a big difference. So what we've seen is an increase in minors and children actually being prosecuted as adults. Now, what that does is it takes them out of the juvenile justice system. It puts them into an adult system. It also means that they are then eligible to have adult sentencing and be placed into adult detention centers, whether they're jails or prisons. And that is at a very different level, and certainly not one in which most of these minors are mentally ready, right, or equipped to be prepared for that. The other thing is that we have sentencing still that's considered legal of minors of life without parole, which is basically sentencing them to die in jail, that they will know nothing. Now think about a 15, 14, 13-year-old kid sentenced to life in jail without a possibility of parole. We know by the studies that by the time, most of these juveniles reach 25 to 30 years of age, they are less likely to be committing crimes. And so what are we really achieving by keeping them there 30, 40, 50 years? And that, again, is something that can be done through legislation. But on the local level, it wasn't until about 3 years ago that I discovered that our school district actually has a police force, a police department, the Clark County School District Police Department. And I always wondered, why is it that we need police in the schools themselves? And I was very fortunate to be able to participate in a panel that talked about this issue about police in schools. And what was so fabulous about this panel was that it was actually organized by the students themselves, talking about what it meant to them to see these police officers walking around fully armed down the hallways of their schools, and what it did to them mentally, how it made them feel, and how it was a true detriment to their learning. And in some of these places, we sort of call them, they're resource officers. And I can remember, and I'm sure, Jonathan, you remember this in 2018 during that session, they had just had the Parkland shooting. Everybody was talking about security in schools. And the legislature added another 18 million to the education portion of the budget, right? And so for many of us in the Democratic Party, we were like, that's great, take the 18 million, let's get social workers in there, let's get counselors in there, let's help these kids. Where really, no, what the Republicans wanted was they wanted more armed teachers, actually. They were talking about using the money to buy the guns, to buy the weapons, to, arm these teachers. They didn't talk about, let's train the teachers. They didn't talk about make sure they have permits. No, they just talked about, let's give them guns. Right? And so there's a very fundamental difference in perspective between the parties as to what it means to help these children, these minors in our school system. Because the other thing that we haven't talked about when people mention the school to prison pipeline, let's also talk about the perspective that who's being affected by the school to prison pipeline is not every child. Mm-hmm. Right? It's the Black and the brown and the poor children who are being pulled into this school to prison pipeline and sort of discarded. Or, I was even having a talk this morning of one of the problems that happens a lot with sexual crimes is that if the victim is Black or brown, they're not taken seriously. They won't even investigate at these points with these crimes, right? And it's the same thing that we're seeing in school. If a child, acts up in school and they're Black and brown, it's, we got to throw the book at them. We've got to then report them out. And then we have a judiciary system that is very willing to sentence these children, right? Very willing to give them this record for the rest of their life. And what that does for the rest of their life is not only affects that child, but it affects that family, it affects that neighborhood, it affects that generation as you go through and through and through, And it reminds me always of this phrase that says, what are the safest communities? It's not those communities that have a police cop at every corner. The safest communities in this country are those communities that have the resources, right? So as Richard Winfield is talking about, the federal has to invest in this. Yes. The state has to invest in this. Yes. We have a big problem in this country that we sort of align things that shouldn't be aligned, right? The school funding with property taxes or healthcare with our employment. These are things that it's a problem because they are so aligned together. They need to be separated. That's how we can solve these issues. But, and the last thing I'll say is that idea of resources, because we always get back to, well, you just want to raise taxes so that you can then have these resources. No, you know what? There is a lot in our budget that we can go through and reallocate as to where that money is going and to make it be used effectively, right? But the other thing is that there are a ton of foundations out there who are offering money for programs that help the youth in terms of juvenile justice, for restorative justice, for making sure that they're getting the resources that they need. And so one of the things that I have committed to is hiring a full-time grant writer in the DA's office. And that's what they're going to do. They're going to go out, they're going to find the money, they're going to bring that money into our community, and they're going to work with community groups, because I don't want to see the kids in that courtroom, right? I don't want to see the kids get touched by this system, because once they're in it, it is so hard to get them out. I have read profiles and case after case after case of these kids who were brought in for the minutest things, right? 71% of our juvenile justice cases that we see right now is for loitering. Loitering, they're on a street, they're hanging out with their friends, and they get picked up. Okay? We're supposed to be keeping the community safe by going after serious crime, not these kind of crimes. We should not be criminalizing just being young, because we certainly don't do it if they're not Black and brown. Okay, and we've got the college students back here, right? And we can see what's happening with these college students and how they get treated so differently than the Black and brown students who actually live in our community.
Okay. Let me chime in real quick here, because I've kind of been on several different sides of this issue myself. I am a Black man, so got brown family members. I have two sons who came through entirely the Clark County public school system. That's K through 12. Both of them made it out. Both of them, have big plans for their future. And it was a family effort. So I think that's number one. We have to remember that we do have to get some of this back in the community and back on the families as far as how to solve this. The other thing I say is it kind of comes to a shift in focus as well. I understand the images and the ideology behind what people feel when they see officers in schools, but I think if we are training officers the correct way, then being in the schools is more beneficial than people realize. I was a resource officer. I was at Cedar Shoals for several months as a resource officer myself. And I don't know if you all know, but Georgia is one of the few and one of the first to even mandate specific training for school resource officers. I think we can go further because a lot of people don't embrace what that school resource officer program is truly intended to be. It's supposed to be an educational piece. And I think that's where we fall short sometimes. Sometimes it does get to be punitive. At the end of the day, unless it's a serious criminal offense, those things are supposed to be handled at the school administration level. So little things like, even if it's something, marijuana possession or fighting, detention, tardiness, any truancy issues, those are all still supposed to be handled at that level. The officers are there more for protection. So when you do have issues like the school shootings, there's a automatic defense mechanism that's there. So if you call 911, you already have somebody who's aware of the school layout. So from those standpoints, I believe that that's still a good idea having that. But yes, I agree. We do have to have that mind state shift. When I was there, my biggest focus was the kids. I wanted to talk to the kids every day. It wasn't about me being armed and having a gun. It was about me being able to reach out and talk to them and then answer questions for their parents. And if they have questions about something, hey, is this a crime? Hey, can you do that? We have somebody with actual knowledge so they don't just go to their friends or look at on the internet or reach out to somebody who may not have their best interest in mind when they try to get answers to those difficult questions. Because I had them when I was growing up. I grew up in Gary, Indiana. We had officers in our schools. And it was, it was hit or miss on what the officers were like. But the good officers that were in the schools, you knew because they got answers from kids. So they told the officers when somebody might have a gun or when somebody might be planning to have a fight, to intervene prior to that and take them to the school that handle issues. I think when I was at Cedar, I was asked to leave. Why? Because I was so involved in the kids. We had some kids who were caught skipping, and we had another officer that had to be in court. And the principal at that time didn't want me to leave the school because he thought that it was going to be all fire and brimstone because the school resource officer left the school. And I think that that mentality at the school system level has to be addressed as well, because they want to reach out and use officers for things that they weren't ever intended to do. Most officers are not going to have that mentality of trying to lock kids up. It's not the popular opinion. It's not what the media says, but I can tell you from an officer's point of view, the last thing we want to do is get involved in some juvenile cases, because in the court system, you go to juvenile court, that's an all-day thing. You don't go and you're in and out. You might be there 6, 7 hours and then not even get called, or they might not even have that juvenile in court that day. So it's all these things that you have to consider. But I think that bridge to the community is something that we are not utilizing.
John, you're kind of breaking up. I think you're
it's resource fixing things, not just locking people up.
Thank you. We didn't catch all of that last bit. Kind of broke up for a second. Sorry. But we appreciate you.
Okay.
I want to jump in there and build off of something that Mr. Williams said. I think that's really important. It's about the mindset change. And when we look at the school to prison pipeline, where we started our conversation, that mindset, I think, is something, when we look, how did that problem get created in the first place? And it started with the zero tolerance policies. It's this move to extremism, this move to treat our children like they're commodities, and not like they're little growing people who need to be helped and shown how to succeed in this world and corrected, but treated with love. And so the idea that we can punish people into goodness is, I think, the fundamental challenge that we have here with both the school to prison pipeline and our criminal justice policy as a country as a whole. We think we can punish people into success, and that's just not how it works. Any experience of success I've had, it's been with the benefit of my family, with the benefit of people in my community lifting me up. And I think that's what we're talking about, trying to provide for our students across the board, whether they come up in an area that doesn't have a lot of resources or whether they come up in one that does. That's what we're trying to balance out, is how do we make sure we take care of these kids? So I think the other piece that John spoke about that I'd like to touch on is the outsourcing mentality. It's somebody else's problem. So if the teachers and the administration say this kid has too much work problems, I'm gonna pull the school resource officer to come in and solve the issue. They're sort of letting go of their responsibility to help grow that kid. They're removing themselves from that equation a little bit. I don't think people are doing that necessarily intentionally. I think they get exhausted by the demands that are placed on them. This goes back to what Richard said about paying our teachers what they're worth and not shortchanging them, which is what we've done for the last 20 years in the state of Georgia. We shortchange them every recession and we never catch them back up to where they need to be. And then a governor comes along and says, I'm going to give $2,000 here, $3,000 there. And it's not even getting them back to where they should have been if they kept up with inflation. They're making less now than they were 10 years ago, teachers are. So when a teacher throws up their hand and says, this kid has problems that are bigger than me, that comes back to us here in this panel right now. It comes back to the legislators. It comes back to the DA. It comes back to the sheriff's office. It comes back to the community to step in and address those problems, which are, they stem from white supremacy, they stem from systemic poverty, and it stems from folks saying that's not my problem. And we got to change that. We got to change that attitude in our community. And that means not just the people who are facing the problem, but the people who don't have those experiences. They need to step up and recognize that this is their community too.
Can I just comment on this issue of zero tolerance? Because I've noticed it as a parent, that it would be very commonplace in the schools in Athens, and I'm sure everywhere in America, that when you have kids who do things that are treated as breaking against zero tolerance rules, they end up getting expelled. Or sometimes it could be permanently, sometimes for a significant period of time. And that is, extremely harmful to obviously their education. How can they possibly keep up with classes when they return, if they are allowed to return? They should be kept in school. The school should have the staffing to help them through any problems they're undergoing. After all, kids are acting up, much of what they're experiencing out of school, at home, and the like. And I think another issue having to do with our schools that I think exacerbates the school to prison pipeline is that, as we all know, our schools are really reducing the programs they have in terms of enrichment activities in both athletics, the arts, theater, everything else, in classrooms during the school day, and they're doing virtually nothing after school. Whereas affluent parents are running around all afternoon on weekends, driving their kids here and there to all sorts of activities, And what are the kids left with whose parents don't have the money to do that? You know, the schools should have those activities on their premises after the school day ends. So kids have interesting and fun things to do and not have to be picked up for loitering and such things.
I guess I'll just chime in after him real quick. Maybe it's not real quick, but I've experienced the school to prison pipeline system as a mother and as an educator, you know, from teaching GED classes. So the kids that get expelled from school or that fell through the cracks tend to end up in my GED classes. And often they're very bright. It's surprisingly because it's surprising, it has to do with the academic thing as well, because they can actually do the work, but yet they end up in my classroom at 16 years old. I ask them what happened. It's some type of incident and where maybe they were being bullied or just, it's a lot of different reasons behind why someone might get expelled out of school. It's a complex problem, but the school system doesn't take the time to really get to know what's at the bottom line. So as a mother now, I've experienced it to where my child was being bullied. There was an incident that occurred where on a Sunday, she was at a store and she basically gets jumped by 2 or 3 people. The next day, when I took her to school, I made sure I went to the guidance counselor. I asked for a restorative session for something to be done because I felt as if, you know, this was testing. I wanted my daughter to go back to school this week, but at the same time, I was concerned that something else might happen. Well, my daughter ended up getting into a fight with the young lady again and end up getting disorderly conduct. This is the opening to the school to prison pipeline system. So now she has a disorderly conduct charge. Everybody believes that peer court is going to be a solution because she's in the high school system and that some alternative high school program is going to work. Keep in mind, my daughter is 17 and a half years old. So when we go to the courthouse, she's going to adult court. She's not going to juvenile court. She's going to adult court, just like Deborah said, because she's 17 and a half years old. We sit in this courtroom with my daughter and her friend and the other young lady that they got into an altercation with. Irregardless, as a mother, I took her to school that day. I tried to intervene. I tried to get restorative intervention. I felt like they failed us on that end, but now I'm sitting in court. Somewhere in the middle of the session, they asked us to get up and move to like the right side of the courtroom. And I see young men, nothing but Black and brown men, come into the courtroom in shackles. I couldn't believe that my daughter had to see this. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And I swear to you, majority of those people were Black men. And they were probably no more than over 30, majority of them. So that's why I'm in this fight, because I've lived it, I've experienced it, I've seen people go through the system as an educator, because like I said, as a GED educator, a lot of people are ending up in my class. Some of it is a part of their sentence, part of their probation. If they cannot complete that, it's a violation of your probation. So I've seen how the system works and how the zero tolerance policy impacts our youth, from low misdemeanor, bullying, retaliation fights, and we're not serving our children. And then on top of that, we have representatives that are cutting the budget. So I would agree, you know, it shouldn't be tied to state representatives to make a decision. You know, we should get national funding and we should be able to change the way the system is working, because it is impacting our children.
I'm glad if anybody wants to add on to what Mocha just said. I will say there is a question from the audience.
I've got one thing before we jump. Jump off. Is the other thing I reflect on is there's been we had the zero tolerance policies. We had the outsourcing discipline. It's not, and then the third thing I wanted to point out is we have a getting good grades focus. That school is about getting good grades, and I think that's a mistake. It's not about getting good grades, because number one, we know there's grade inflation that has occurred over the years. But number two, getting good grades is focusing on results as opposed to focusing on what each individual child needs. The differentiated education, the differentiated needs for each child, and helping them become what I think the purpose of school is to grow good people. How do we help them become good citizens who are engaged with their community? And so, I think Mocha's exactly right. We cut $1 billion from education, our legislature did this last cycle. There were other options that they did. The only reason that our schools are sort of made whole is because of federal help. So we've already seen that there are times when we have to have federal funding to help us, and it's there when we need it. It was there when we needed it to get our schools through with the CARES Act and such. But we can balance our state budget without doing it on the backs of our teachers and our students, and that's what I'm going to do when I get back to the State House.
Anyone's welcome to add on to that. I'm tell yes about all
that. I'll go ahead. So we've touched on it a little bit here and there, but one of the major problems we have with the school to prison pipeline specifically is from an early age, as Jonathan mentioned, we're just focusing on punishment. If you've worked with kids, if you know anyone that works with kids, you probably heard that the ones who are acting out are the ones that need the most attention. The kids who are doing well in school or participating in athletics, but you can kind of afford to not pay attention as much. The ones who are acting out are the ones that it's just a call for help. There's something going on, and that's from an early age. The way we punish that, though, it's a punishment. It's not addressing the underlying cause. It's not addressing the reason they're acting out. It's saying you have to stop that. And we're doing that from elementary school and middle school and into high school. So from an early age, we're abandoning these kids, because what these punishments often end up looking like is abandonment. In my high school and my middle school, if you were tardy or late 5 times in the semester, you were given ISS or in-school suspension. And this is when you were taken out of class and put in a detention room for set amount of time. You're missing class, you're missing instruction, you're being removed from the community, you're being identified as a troublemaker or whatever else you may label someone as, and you're not getting any benefit out of it. It's just a punishment. And so it's just passing on the buck, as someone mentioned, whenever you're giving this problem to resource officers, or you're just saying, get out of the way, go to alternative schools if you've gotten in real trouble, and just get out of the classroom with all the good kids. So doing this from an early age is conditioning kids to not trust the system, to view the system as uninterested in their problems. And then we're surprised when they graduate that they're not model citizens, or what we want model citizens to be. And we have to refocus on actually getting to the core problems. And what Deborah mentioned earlier, the alternative to arming teachers with social workers. It's an amazing idea. School counselors are reduced basically to graduation assistants in most public schools, because they're trying to get the couple of kids who can go to college to get into college and make the most out of themselves. And they're focusing on a very small subset because it's just them and 700 students. If you have more social workers, more counselors in there, you're able to identify the problems that are leading to undesired behavior, and also keeping our schools safer from instances like Parkland, where the shooter are students who have been ostracized, feel that they've been left out and abandoned by the system.
I want to chime in real quick and also say that if we're going to have, I know that we all are proactive with restorative justice coordinators, social workers, psychologists in the schools. We have to be very careful to make sure that these professionals are also properly trained with cultural bias, racial education classes, awareness classes, because we don't want children to be diagnosed with mental conditions and problems because they don't understand this behavior and they're mistaking it for something else. So we don't, we're trying to fix a problem, and at the same time, I want us to be very careful on how the approaches that we use, because it's a complex and a real life situation, such as Richard that has been in the classroom. When you're in the classroom dealing with students, dealing with parents, also dealing with the infrastructure and have to work within the policies, because that's what it becomes. It becomes all about the policies and meeting state requirements, and you start getting so far away from actually doing what you need to do with the student, teaching the student, educating the student, and being able to identify what they really need. And when you're in a large class size, it's even more of an injustice. And when I see them reducing stuff like state contributions for teachers' pension fund, we're already not getting paid properly. And it's like, we don't get paid enough. You know what I mean? And they're just cutting budget left and right. And it's not going to be fair to the teachers or to the students.
I think, the way the schools are struggling with the pandemic is also a wake-up call to ensure that the schools have these extra services they need. I mean, I think we all know that, particularly in recent years, the staffing of nurses and medical personnel in schools has been reduced. So instead of there always being one, as I'm familiar with when I went to the public schools, you have a lot of schools in which there's no nurse on that you can count on being there during the entire school day. There certainly are no counselors there. I mean, the psychologists have to cover a lot of different schools, each one, and certainly social workers are not on hand. So I think we have to think of this as it's a national problem. It requires a national investment so that every school has staff and properly trained, as Mocha is suggesting, so they know what they're doing and are treating students with respect. But they have to be there as part of the school, as just a kind of basic requirement for every school to have on hand.
Yeah.
And give all the kids the attention they need.
Deborah, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, I really love the way that Mocha sort of gave us this cautionary part, right? To when we think of these wonderful solutions, I think we tend to always think of how they work in the ideal, in the best, without always understanding that just people being people, that's not always, no matter what the intention, that's not always the results. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's what happens with the resource officers. And I was very specific to distinguish between a resource officer in a school and a police officer in a school, because I think those two have different roles and they take their perspective of their role in a school differently. I mean, when we think of a police officer, we think of somebody who's going to go to a problem and is going to arrest somebody, right? That they're there to set the order of what's happening. When we think of a resource officer, the first thing that comes to our mind is somebody who's going to come and help the issue, right? Not just take the people away and take somebody to jail or something. I think that's really important. And so when we think about, we want resources in for the kids, but we don't necessarily want someone whose first focus is always going to be law and order and, discipline and punishment. Because that is what we keep seeing, these kids being criminalized for youthful behavior, not being given the opportunities to resolve things, and one of the problems that we have right now in the juvenile justice system is there's just no room to do restorative justice. Physically, there's no room. Mocha and her daughter being in the same courtroom waiting while all of those other guys were coming in shackled, right? They could have, if there was more room, they could have been in a separate area where they would not have been exposed to that. Because the one thing that we seem to do really well with our criminal legal system is that we keep re-traumatizing people over and over and over again. And that is the problem, right? That re-traumatization. We keep talking about criminal statistics. You know what? That's what gets reported, right? But what about the violence that happens? What about the trauma that happens that people are suffering that never get reported? One of the big issues when we talked about COVID is the increase in domestic violence and child abuse. right? Because they're in isolation, they're away from the people who are mandated to report certain things and they get to see them, and these are all connected. And I think that's a point that Richard Winfield brings up very well. And I know that Zachary Perry has also spoken about this. When we talk about school to prison pipeline, we talk about poverty, we talk about the housing condition, we talk about economics and the fact that we have millions and millions of people out of work right now and how that all affects the system. It is all intertwined together, right? And I think that's really important for us to keep in mind, that anything that we talk about this criminal justice system can connect to anything else that we'll talk about in any of these candidate conversations.
I think it's important to speak about what you just did, the real traumatic character of being sucked into the criminal justice system for the people who are. One of my sons works as a sort of mental health counselor at Advantage. And he's very scrupulous in not telling me any details about anyone. But he does say that, many of his clients, they've been into the criminal justice system. And it is really a traumatizing experience. And we have to recognize that it is something that doesn't just end when you've done your time. This is something that's going to haunt you psychologically because of everything you have to go through for the rest of your life. Besides, under current conditions, sticking you with a record that's going to cripple your opportunities. And, it's clear we're just putting too many people through that route. It has to do with the laws, criminalizing all sorts of things that need not be criminalized, such as personal drug use of any kind. And there's no reason to treat things that are really not very important misdemeanors as being things that could possibly lead to jail. And often they lead to jail because there's a fine attached. And if you don't pay the fine, even though we're supposed to not have debtors prison, people can end up not only having to borrow money, getting interest, and becoming more and more in debt, more and more impoverished, but they end up in filling a jail. And of course, the whole probation system is based upon the threat of sticking people who can't pay their fees back in jail, even though that violates the idea of debtors prison. So I really think we have to recognize that there's been this gigantic proliferation of fees and fines throughout the criminal justice system, partly to fund mass incarceration and the explosive growth of incarceration since the drug-on war, the war on drugs and the war on crime, so-called, began. And we have to think of alternatives. Instead of fines, instead of fees, people can do community service or something else and avoid sucking people into what is going to be a brutalizing and traumatizing life experience.
Maybe.
We also,
oh, go ahead.
yeah, Richard just said we need to avoid sucking people into a brutalizing, traumatizing experience, which is accurate, but also I think we need to work towards changing that experience. Prison, the criminal justice system, probation, parole, those should be methods of rehabilitation, not just punishment. Now, there's an element of that, who are we mad at and who are we scared of and who do we want to help? There are some things that we, as a society, decided, yeah, you need to do your time. You need to face the consequences of your action. But we have a system that creates career criminals out of petty criminals or people that shouldn't even be criminalized at all. If you get caught with a gram of weed and you get a sentence of 5 years in prison, by the time you come out of prison, you're going to have a hard time finding a job. If you were 17 whenever you went into prison, you may not have any kind of support system for whenever you get out. You may not have housing, which makes everything else harder. If you have a drug addiction, you're going to fall back on that. If you have mental health issues, those are unlikely to be addressed in your time in prison, and the time in probation, they're not going to be addressed. And so we need to change that experience because we need to reduce recidivism and that would reduce the amount of people that are in there. But then it comes back to connected. These communities are broken because of our criminal justice system. We are pulling out people from communities, replacing them into rural communities, using those numbers for congressional redistricting, by the way. And we're destroying these communities because we don't set them up for success. When these people come back, they're just kicked out. You have a whole lot of fees, can't find a job. And the jobs that you can find, your employers know that you need that job. So they're more likely to violate your rights. And you're stuck in this. And on top of all that, you can't vote. You don't get to have a voice in the system that put you in this situation.
I think I would be curious to hear from John specifically, because if we're talking about how complicated this system is and how it's affected by so many different things, including poverty and racism, all these different systems that work together to make it as unequal and unjust as it is. And so while we have policymakers like Jonathan and Mocha and Richard and hopefully Zach, and then we have people in the actual courtrooms trying to make sure that fewer people go to jail, while that's happening, hopefully we have folks like John Q. Williams who do have to interact with people in the jail. How do you make that a more restorative place instead of a punitive place?
I think the key in that is just remember, you got to go back to that base like I have in my upbringing. You have to make sure that you're treating people with dignity and respect, especially at my level. If I'm elected sheriff, you have to realize most of the people that are in the Clark County Jail have not been convicted of anything, or at most it's a misdemeanor and they're going to be, in that jail a short time. So we want to be able to make sure that those who do end up in that part of the system are treated with dignity and respect. We can do more as far as having programs that give them some of those ideas as far as when they get out. There's programs, why do we contract out for food and for medical and mental health services? We could be building programs within the jail that people can actually help themselves. One thing that Advantage does is Advantage finds people who have been in certain situations in crisis, may have been suicidal, and they survive it, and they come back and they go through training and they help other people that have been through those programs as well. So that's what we want to have. We want to have people who've been through those experiences. We want to make them not as tough as they are. There is going to be a punitive aspect to it. I'm not going to say that. I mean, there is an aspect of that to it. The one other thing that I want to say is we talk about school to prison pipeline. Unfortunately, there are still going to be some youth that are going to be committing crimes that may be in the system and be arrested or whatever. So we also have to make sure we got programs. It's kind of a self-promotion here. I'm on a board for a newly formed nonprofit started by Jalita Sanders called Juvenile Offender Advocates. Those types of programs, I think we need to back and get behind so that when folks of a young age are in the system, they're assigned somebody. I don't know, everybody's family situation is going to be different. They have different people that they look up, but I think having a trained advocate that goes through all those things that Mocha mentioned, the cultural, the anti-bias training, just understanding what it's like and people are different so that they're not biased when they deal with these kids they've been assigned to, and they can truly help them and be a bridge between the legal system, the school system, whatever social services that they need, just to keep that kid more likely to get back on track and to fight for those kids going forward. And I think those are the things that we need to be focused on, because there's going to be crime. It's a good goal to say, hey, we want to reduce crime or we want to eliminate crime, but there's going to be some form of crime. We have to work on what we do. So not only that the folks who are committing these crimes have assistance, but we also have to realize there are actual victims here. So we can't, I guess, desensitize ourselves to the fact that there are victims. So we do have to have some things that are punitive, but ultimately, at the end of the day, we want to get everybody being productive members of society. And we do that by programs, the pre-trial arrest, the pre-arrest diversion, all of those things are issues that we can work on and build them out.
I wanted to add one more thing here, which is tangentially related, but it came to mind when we were talking about the funding, is that we have a census that's up this year. And a recent article came out that showed that about 45% of Athens still hasn't filled that out. And we were talking about resources for our students and resources for our teachers. Just to put some dollar signs behind that, that census, if everybody fills that out, each person who fills that out, that's $3,200 more coming from the federal government to Athens, Clarke County. That's going to help address all of the things that we've been talking about. So I just wanted to put a quick plug in asking for folks who are watching to spread the word that we have until September 31st to get that done.
I wanted to comment on on a remark that Deborah had made about, in conjunction with Mocha, about in a way, the overcrowding in the courthouse, in the courtrooms, and the like. And this sort of raises the issue of what kind of funding we need for our criminal justice system, because you have these projects or the proposals to defund the police. Mariah Parker's proposal to cut funding by 50%, and the funds that are set free, are allocated for things like social workers and other kinds of people who provide a different kind of public safety. But I think we have to recognize there's certain aspects of the criminal justice system that are very underfunded, and the crowding in prisons is part of that. For example, if we really get rid of cash bail everywhere, I mean, I've read that 60% of the people in jail are there because they can't pay cash bail. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, cash bail is pretrial punishment to the poor, and it should be abolished. There's no excuse for it whatsoever. Now, if you did that nationwide, that would mean the number of people in jails would be reduced by 60%. You wouldn't need to have such big, fancy jails, let's say. But on the other hand, we don't, even if we were to reduce the number of laws that are sticking people in courtrooms, there's one thing that I think requires that we really expand the number of judges we have so that we can have more trials going through simultaneously. That is the problem of plea bargaining. And, it's kind of staggering, but nationwide, 95% of people who are accused of a crime end up plea bargaining, meaning they're pleading guilty. And that often means that they're entering the system of mass incarceration. And that also means that the facts of their case are not being examined in the courtroom, which is a matter not just of not fully respecting the right of the accused, but not fully respecting the rights of the victims or the public at large, because the facts of the case are a public matter. It's a concern of justice. And in many nations in Europe, on the continent, not in Great Britain, you do not have pleas of any sort. Everything that comes to court that a judge considers to be worthy of having a trial will go to court, and if the defendant is going to confess, that's not the end of the case. We all know that confessions can be lies to protect other people. They could be based on a delusion. They could be based on many things. And think of the assassination of Martin Luther King and what happened with James O'Reilly, who pleaded guilty. As a result, there was no investigation of the facts of the case. And when he was later in jail and wanted to be retried so he could say something about the conspirators who were behind it all, that would be double jeopardy. It couldn't be done. Now, I proposed to Deborah that I think we should abolish plea bargaining and pleas entirely, and she responded in a way that I think all prosecutors and those who are hoping to be prosecutors will say, is that, look, if we have to have real trials of all these cases, it will completely overwhelm the system. Well, it wouldn't overwhelm the system if we properly funded the system with more prosecutors, more judges, and then, of course, we could also diminish how many people are brought if we change the laws. But I think that's an important aspect of funding. If we want to avoid this kind of what I consider the highway to mass incarceration, if we really want to end plea bargaining, which is not accepted in many other parts and many other democracies of the world, we have to expand funding of that part of the criminal justice system, which involves prosecutors and judges. And that then can allow things to be brought to trial speedily, as they should be. Everyone deserves a speedy trial and be able to move on with their lives. And we need to man people properly.
What is your take on that, Deborah, or your perhaps alternative viewpoint?
So a couple things. First of all, I totally agree that there's too much plea bargaining. And in fact, here in Athens and Oconee, that plea bargaining number is at 97%, which is much higher than the national average of 95% that Richard Winfield did say. And I did say, you know, in the current system that we have, there would be no way to give every single case a trial. We just don't have the resources. We are limited by the number of judges that we have. And the one thing that Richard did not mention are defense attorneys. You know, the vast majority of individuals actually end up applying for a public defender because they don't have the funds to then go out and retain and engage their own private defense attorney in order to do this. So there's two sides, right? There's the prosecution and there's the defense, and we need to expand both of that, right? And when you talk about judges, it's also an expansion of courtrooms. So right now, what happens in Athens, for example, is we may have court every day because we have a certain amount of judges here, but in Oconee, they have court once a week, right? Because they're actually getting the judges from the Athens Clark courthouse, who then will then go and make that arrangement to go over to Oconee. So if we had more judges, yes, we can go a little bit faster with this. One of the problems that we have in terms of the plea negotiation is the idea that a lot of times prosecutors will actually overcharge individuals. And so they start the plea negotiation not necessarily with the crime that the person is supposed to have committed, but with a whole list of additional crimes that they sort of added on so that then they can negotiate down. My view on this is that part of that is how are prosecutors evaluated in terms of their performance. And for now, the old school thinking has always been the more convictions you get, the longer the sentences you get, that makes you a great prosecutor, right? And so what we need to do is actually change the culture in the prosecutor's office, that what we really are about is not the punishment, as so many people have talked about today, but really about holding people accountable and making that accountability fit what it is that they've done and not be cruel in the way that we are doing things that, you know, when we overcharge people, and this is a complaint that I have heard from a number of judges in our system currently, is this idea that prosecutors will go in and put up all these charges to make something a felony, which falls within the DA office, only to then, after a year of this person sitting in jail because they could not pay that cash bail, for it to be brought down to a misdemeanor and time served. Okay? So right at the very beginning are things that we can do to, number one, lessen the prosecutions that are actually made so that it frees up resources to have those trials that should be actually in place. We have too many stories that I've heard of individuals who are caught with a litany of these charges and then told, but I'll bring it down to this if you confess to being guilty for it, right? And so an individual who truly could have gone through a trial process and be found innocent are given the option of go through that long trial process, stay in jail, or I'll let you out right now if you sign that you're guilty for this. See, that's a problem. But that, again, depends on how is the prosecutor evaluated on their performance, because that's incentives to people, right? If you're told on your job, I want you to do X, Y, Z, and then you'll get promoted, or then you're going to have your golden star, that's what people are going to do. They're going to do X, Y, Z. And if they really don't like it, then they'll go and they'll move someplace else and then get another job. And so what we're left with are prosecution offices that are filled with people that for their entire career have been doing X, Y, Z. That's how they got evaluated, and that's what they learned, and that's what they do. Okay, so do I agree we need more trials? Absolutely. Do I think we have the resources to do that right now? No. Right? In just the reality of the system that we have. Is that a goal that we can work towards? Absolutely, right? Just like cash bail. All the stuff on cash bail reform right now has been for basically misdemeanors. And you know what? That's the Solicitor General's office. That doesn't fall under the DA. But I have been very actively pursuing those case studies that deal with now some DAs starting to look at cash bail reform on felonies. Okay. But that is still not taken hold yet. Everything that's out there is about misdemeanors, right? So when people say, oh, Deborah is not all for eliminating cash bail, that's not it at all. I want to make sure that when we make those moves, that we are doing it in a way that we're not going to be hauled back to court and said, no, you can't do that, right? I want to make sure that we are doing what's going to be sustainable and that's going to take place for the long run. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Zach had something to say.
And, yeah, Deborah pointed out that most reforms, not all the reforms, have been focused on misdemeanor offenses regarding cash bail. The reason for that is one of the most powerful lobbies in any state regarding criminal justice reform is the bail lobby. My opponent takes a lot of money from bail bondsmen. I imagine Jonathan does. I imagine Anoka does. And maybe Deborah. But and I imagine also John Hughes. Everybody's opponent. Republicans take a lot of money from bail bondsmen. And these bail bondsmen make it very difficult to get anywhere on bail reform. So the Georgia Commission on Criminal Justice Reform was looking at bail reform, and the only thing that the bail bondsman lobby would allow them to talk about was misdemeanor reform. That's all they were allowed to look at. And we have places that we need to go, but that's just a start. The fact that we're deciding whether or not someone can go free before they've had their day in court based on the size of their bank account is not only appalling and just absurd, it's ineffective. It's not the best way to get people to come to trial. It's not the most effective way to get people to show up. And it's not the most effective way to keep the community safe while people await trial. The most effective ways of getting people to show up are texting them and calling them the day before to remind them, hey, you got trial tomorrow, giving them rides, to get the sheriff's office, John Hughes would be great, or even just, a separate entity to give them rides there. And more people will be able to show up. Because the reason people go to trial isn't because they're trying to escape from the law. It's because they forget, they have work, or they just can't get there in time. So focus on doing those things. And if someone's determined to be a danger to the community, the fact that they can put up $10,000 shouldn't be the reason they get out. If they're a danger to the community, the size of the bank account isn't going to change that. And so we have to challenge the bail bonds lobby, and we have to hold our leaders accountable to say, if you're taking money from these people, and then next year, whenever, in 2018, whenever Athens passes a misdemeanor bail reform, and you turn around and sponsor legislation that mandates bail and takes discretion away from judges, and you're also taking a lot of money from bail bondsmen, we're going to draw connections. And I don't necessarily think that's false. So.
Could I just comment quickly on something Deborah had said about this other side of the lack of resources, namely defense attorneys? Indeed, one of the things that really contributes to 95% nationally of criminal cases going to plea bargaining is that the defendants involved, who by and large are overwhelmingly poor people, who have to go to either court-appointed lawyers or legal aid clinics. The lawyers they're using have comparatively very, very limited resources to investigate anything before the trial goes on, or to bring in experts of any sort to deal with the facts of the case. And by and large, they have such a heavy caseload that I think on average, legal aid attorneys, their clients see them maybe 1 hour total. In 20% of the cases, they don't meet their lawyer until they go to court. Now, I think there is a kind of solution to this. And I think there are enough people who want to have law careers to be able to serve people as needed. Because, as we know, there's been a shortage in applications to law schools because people are worried about being able to make a living in it. But if we had a legal care for all system, like Medicare for all, where basically there'd be this government-funded legal insurance program where like under Medicare to all, you go to any medical practitioner you want. Here, you go to any lawyer you want to defend you in criminal cases as well as civil. And, you know, they will be paid enough to be able to handle the case. And that would, in a way, provide, I think, potentially enough people to be able to move to a situation where we can give people their day in court, not railroad them through plea bargaining. And as Deborah says, there are these multiple sides to the issue that have to all be tackled by us.
Hey, can I chime in real quick here? Because I have to go. This has been a wonderful discussion. We have a lot to talk about. I would love to talk more about the pre-arrest diversion program, but I do have to go. So I'm going to do a shameless plug. AADM does have a teen social justice program. We cultivate future leaders by taking them on field trips. We took them to March for Our Lives. That started out many years ago. We also have an end of school to prison pipeline program. We have an annual end of school to prison pipeline conference that's coming up. So I want to just, you know, encourage everyone to find out how you can get involved and get engaged any way that you can. Know that Athens Anti-Discrimination Movement is out here doing some work, and I hope that you will support that. Also, donate to Mocha for Georgia and join us at the Arch if you can with UGA law students. So thank you for having me, y'all. And I know I'm going to see you later, Erin. Bye, y'all.
Bye, Mocha. Thank you so much. We love having you.
Thank you.
It is a good time to sort of generally wrap up and give your shameless plugs for all of you. We like that here. But if there was one more thing that you wanted to add to the conversation before Mocha dipped out, now would be the moment.
Let me give one.
Okay, we'll go John and then Deborah. All right.
Just my thing I want to put out there, because the word culture has come up a lot in a lot of the answers and responses in this. And I want to say that that's a big part of the whole criminal justice reform, the entire concept to me. From a law enforcement perspective, I think it can also be applied to wherever it is, at the federal, the court, the local systems, whatever. I think we throw around a lot of terms, and from law enforcement, I can speak from my folks. Community-oriented policing has been a hot buzz topic for a long time, and it's proven that it does work, it does help in the community. The problem is that we've been focused so much on it as an idea, as a concept, but we have not embraced it as an actual culture. And I think if we can get that cultural mind state going, that's going to help on everybody's this attitude mind state at all levels. So I think we really have to get into, not just in law enforcement, patrol officers, deputies at the courthouse, in the jail. I think we really have to understand that this needs to be a cultural belief. It can't just be something that somebody says is a good idea. There has to be some buy-in about making things better for society. And that's not just one particular race, color, creed, gender, whatever you're going to use to get that on. So I wanted to throw that out there because I think that word culture is really big in any ideas when it comes to talking about change in our society. And we really have to start changing it at that level. We can't just change it at a scholastic level or, as far as the laws on the books. We have to also understand what, the spirit of the law, what is really behind what we want to accomplish here. We need to really embrace that going forward. And vote for John Q. Williams, www.johnqforsheriff.com. We do accept donations. We'll be getting signs in. I actually got a source coming in with more signs. So we'll be at the next sign pickup September 12th. There are 2 spots. We'll see you there.
Hey, thanks, John. Deborah, you had some good stuff to say.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is such a complex issue. right? Because it has so many things when we talk about in the jail, out of the jail, when we talk about the pre-diversion programs, when we talk about the police force, the sheriff's office, the DA's office. There is just so much that's enveloped in this. But what I want to do right now is just piggyback off of what John Q said about culture, because culture affects perception, right? And our perspective. And I always tell people, you know, they come and they tell me, well, you know, I don't know why the sheriff and the DA, why are they partisan? Why shouldn't they be nonpartisan like the judges? And I tell them, I'm going to give you one reason why they should not be nonpartisan. And that's because budgets are moral documents. And both John Q as the sheriff and myself as the DA are in charge of multi-million-dollar budgets. And we decide based on our values, right? What it is that we're going to focus on, what programs that we're going to focus on, whether we're going to do restorative justice or whether we're going to do punitive justice. Those are decisions made with the dollars in which we control. And what we have seen is over and over again, it does depend on the party that's in those seats as to how that money actually gets spent. And so the idea is that justice should be objectively done, right? We should not have what we have right now, which is a DA office that will, for some people, be lenient, and for others will throw the book at them. And what we found is that over and over again, the only reason for why somebody gets leniency and somebody gets hard is the color of their skin or their socioeconomic status. What we should have are people in those leadership positions that will apply justice equally to everyone, because that's what we don't have now. Justice is not blind now. We have to acknowledge the systemic racism that's in that system. And right now, the people who are leading it are people who refuse to acknowledge that that is even an issue. And if you cannot see and acknowledge that that's the reason why we're having all these protests, that's the reason why there's a protest today at 6 o'clock, right? Because we're saying that these things are wrong. If we have people in leadership positions who refuse to acknowledge that, then they will also be the people who will refuse to commit to it and put the resources needed so that we can have those trainings, as so many of us have said today, in our resources and having the resources for the people. So I just wanted to make that point because I know that that's a question that comes up a lot. And I know that we're going to have these conversations a lot more in the coming days. Thank you.
Thank you so much, you guys. I'm going to write down the one question we got from someone who was watching because I don't feel like we have enough time, but I do want to have enough time for y'all to each be able to kind of say your ending part. So let's start off with something something that's energizing you. I've previously said something that's giving you hope, but maybe this is one and the same, or maybe it's different to you. Something that is energizing you this week. And we'll start with Jonathan Wallace.
Oh man, put on the spot. Well, I will say Deborah's speech. This has been a long week for me personally, but I will say Deborah's speech here just at the end, speaking about the moral values and the importance of leadership. That Deborah, I was getting some energy from you through the Zoom, so thank you for that. You know, because what she's saying is really resonating with me. We have leadership right now who comes and tries to solve problems after they've metastasized, after they've ballooned, after they become big problems. And we started out talking about the school to prison pipeline, and a phrase that kept coming to my mind. There's an idiom that you hear saying, I'm going to apply a Band-Aid to a bullet wound. And the idea is that you're going to try to solve something with a tool that's not really suited for it. And I think what our current leadership is doing and has done is they're either ignoring it altogether and pretending it doesn't exist, as Deborah mentioned, or they're applying leeches to it, which is going the wrong way. They're using outdated modes of thinking. They're using outdated modes of treating issues. When we look at the school to prison pipeline, that is a symptom of a deeper issue that our leaders are refusing to recognize. And so everybody who's here, we're willing to have the courage to step into these spaces, to have these conversations, to do the work. And that's the type of leaders we need in every one of these roles that we're all running for office for. And so that's what gives me hope. That's what inspires me, is to be sharing the stage with with the folks we have here today, knowing that we are the folks who have the courage. You don't see my opponent having these types of conversations out in public, speaking about policy issues, diving into the issues, hearing the stories from the people affected by them. You just don't see them doing that. They're not doing the work. And so it's not just my opponent, it's across the board. We need new leadership in Georgia. So my plug is Jonathan Wallace. My website is wallacefor119.com. That's WALLACEFOR119.com. We need folks to get on the phones. We need folks to donate. We need folks to speak to their friends and family, because this is what it's about, this cycle. We've got to have some leadership in the state level and at the local level and at the federal level.
Zach, will you go next, since you, I know, got to run?
Yeah, what you said inspire me or energizes me? That's what it is. What energizes me is a growth and activism among my generation. And it's been developing a while over this summer, but I'm seeing it come into sections of, or groups that haven't had it in the past. Here at the law school, I've always been kind of disappointed in the amount of activism and local politics that I've seen at the law school. Some organizations have done local community projects and whatnot here and there, but not really active in local politics and local advocacy. And jump to today, the Black Law Student Association at UGA is the one leading a protest involved with other community organizations, and that's fantastic. And so I'm really excited to see people my age not just acknowledge that they have a voice, but using that voice, and using that voice beyond social media and beyond the dinner table, but going out and marching and protesting and making their voice heard and demanding that their leaders represent the interests of all people and not just those who give them campaign information. So thank you all very much. My name is Zachary Caperi. Once again, I'm running for Georgia State Senate District 46, and my website is perryforgeorgia.com. Perry, PERRYFOR Georgia.com. Thank you all very much, and I look forward to working with you guys in the future.
Thanks, Zach. Awesome. Deborah, you want to go next?
Sure. So what gives me energy is the people. The people of this community are really incredible. My phone was hacked yesterday, and it's been a very interesting 24 hours as to what that means. But I had put it out on Facebook. You know, if you need to reach me, use my email address or send me a message on Facebook. And the number of messages that I received, not just in support, sorry you're going through this, but saying, you know, I really want your phone number. I really want to stay connected. Please make sure you have mine. It was that kind of thing. And it just made me feel very, very connected to this community, and reminds me of why I do this work as a public service is for them, you know, and so to have that outreach really gave me the energy to just keep going and plugging away and keeping those hour-long phone calls to try to get the accounts back up, you know, with them. But they also were sharing stories of resilience, stories of things that have happened to them and how they just kept on going. And so they gave me a lot of energy this week. And so thank you to everybody. You can find my information at deborah4da.com. I did put it in the Facebook comments, so make sure that you see it there. And just like all of the other candidates here, we need volunteers. We need people to phone bank, to text, to write postcards, to talk to their neighbors about this. Because two things, please fill out the census. And two, please go and vote down ballot. Yes, it's wonderful. We have a presidency, we have 2 Senate seats. That's great, but we also have state representatives, and we have state senators, and we have a sheriff, and we have a DA. So please, please, please don't just vote for the top of the ticket. Keep going down and vote down ballot. So I like to say Biden to Gonzalez, but we could also say Biden to Wallace, and Biden to John Pugh, and Biden to Winfield, and all the way down. But the idea is Biden to everybody who's there, who can help us, because we need everybody's help. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Richard, you want to go? And then John will have you go last.
I mean, what is energizing me is, in a way, seeing on the one hand what Deborah properly spoke of as the resilience of many people. And I'm I think, and I'm hoping, is a growing body of people who are recognizing that in the 2 months to come, we are really at a turning point in our national history, where the dangers we are facing are gathering steam. And, you know, we're facing these crushing crises of the pandemic that has been not contained, and all of that has left us with this crushing economic crisis, where people are facing hardships that go beyond any we've had recently. And I think that we have to, are you seeing me, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay, good, because something happened to my computer. I can't see myself, so I'll continue. But I think, you know, we're also facing a leadership in Washington and state level that pretend that they're there to maintain law and order. But the law and order they're maintaining is one based on rank injustice and rank deception and lies. And now we find our national leadership and all of its loyal accomplices at the state level calling into question the democratic process that we are about to emerge in, where our president is telling people in North Carolina to vote twice. He's saying that he may have to put off the elections, or that if he were to lose the election on November 3rd, he will not accept its results. And he'll call out all his armed followers into the street. We really have to prepare ourselves and make a huge push in the 2 months to come, that we are going to send to Washington, to the State House, to Athens, candidates who are standing up for genuine, real opportunity, for unchaining our democracy, and for standing up for truth and justice. And I think everyone here is someone who is committed to doing that. And I think you, the voters, now have to do your part. With regard to my race, check out my campaign website, winfieldforsenate.com. I do need volunteers. I need contributions. And I need to get the word out because we are, to a large degree, under the radar. And it's crucial that the voters know who the candidates are, what they stand for, because even if we can defeat the scourge of voter suppression, our right to vote is empty if we don't know who we're voting for or what they stand for. So thank you, A4E, for this opportunity to show who we are, put our message out to the public, and let's move on to victory, an historic victory come November.
Awesome.
Thank you.
The piece de resistance, John D. Williams.
Yeah. First of all, I want to just echo what everybody else said and say, yeah, what they said. Some great inspirational speaking and stories. I'm all in on that. As far as what is giving me energy right now, it's a two-parter. So I'll say the first one is just earlier today, I got reached out to by somebody that I saw as a conservative, and even in speaking to me, started conversations. You know, I'm a conservative, but went on to talk about all the things he's heard me talk about, the forums I've been on, my views, and pretty much he told me, you got my vote. I've never voted Democrat. I don't know what a progressive is, but I believe in what you're saying. So that meant a lot and it inspired me, but it also took me to another mode of thinking. Everybody that was on this panel today, I don't see eye to eye on everything. There've been some, I'm not even gonna say conflicts, there've been some disagreements even within the panel today. But you know what happens? People come together and they talk, and you have these tough discussions, and you don't have to agree to maintain a friendship or understanding or a working relationship. And that's what truly inspires me. If we're truly at that point that we can have these conversations and not just have it automatically be that we're enemies because we didn't see eye to eye on 3 of 10 points, I think that's critical going forward. And I agree, hey, vote down ballot. We've got some things, and you may not agree with everybody, but you know, there's some good candidates out there. There's some definitely quality folks on this panel. And as far as my information, I said it earlier, but it's johnqforsheriff.com, or you can go johnqforathens.com. We actually secured both just in case people Googled it the wrong way. And we need volunteers, we need more money, but we just need to maintain that momentum that we have. And hey, continue to treat people the way you would like yourself and your family treated, and we can solve all the problems in America, right? That's John Q. Share for the people.
Thanks, John. Thank you to all of our panelists today. We really appreciate your time and your effort and your thoughts, and we hope to see y'all again. We're doing this bi-weekly, so we will be doing this absolutely again up until the election in November. So tune in next time, and stay safe, wear a mask, and be good to each other. All right, y'all.